Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. I am so glad after several weeks of being without my precious wife on the podcast to welcome her back. Welcome, sweetheart.
Glad to be back.
I should confess, or maybe you should confess, that it took you a while to actually listen to the shows that you weren't on.
It did. It did.
But I hope that they were
A blessing.
encouraging to
Yeah,
you.
they
Yes,
were. Very
excellent.
much.
Good. Well, we are in the midst of an ongoing series on the Ten Commandments, and we come now today to the fifth commandment, which reminds us to honor our father and our mother, that it may go well with us in the land.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've talked about, that I think is a perfectly appropriate thing, it's a good illustration of one of the ways we rightly use the Old Testament to help us understand, rightly use the New Testament to help us understand the Old Testament. And that's by when we look at Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, taking two of the commandments, the commandment against murder and the commandment against adultery, and not so much expanding what it was, but revealing what it always was from the beginning, that there are heart attitudes, and it's not just for instance, maybe I won't go there. That's unnecessary. My point is that here we come to the honor your father and your mother, and really this is not just father and mother. This is those who are in authority over us. This would be the place, again, where if Jesus chose the fifth commandment instead of the sixth and the seventh to help the original or his audience to understand the more implications, he might say something like, drive the speed limit. Mm-hmm. You know, when you don't drive the speed limit, you're not honoring your father and your mother. That is
Civil authority.
Yeah, that obligation. The civil authority has authority over us in a certain sense, and I'm not saying absolute on any of these things, but this is about being in submission to authority, isn't it? But we should also affirm that there is a sense in which this command ends, and another sense in which it does not end. I remember teaching this to kids and trying to make it simpler, doing a little on-the-fly translation into simple English for little kids, and would say, obey your father and your mother. Well, honor your father and your mother and obey your father and mother are not exactly synonyms, are they?
Yeah.
No, so I'm saying when you're young and you're under the authority of your parents, you do have an obligation to obey them. Mm-hmm. When you're grown and you have established your own home, you still have an obligation to honor them. Do you sense, here we are talking just a few days after Father's Day,
Yeah.
and a few weeks after Mother's Day. Do you get the sense that, and we're living lives with some children grown out of the house, some children still in the house. Do you get a sense that we're getting any of this in our kids?
I do believe we are.
Okay.
I do. I think the boys are very faithful and always expressing in tender and loving ways to both of us.
Yes.
Their appreciation for us, and I believe that comes from their heart. You know, they're not forced to write things. They're very open and very honest. I think that the bigs that are not living in our home, that are local, and Jordan that's in Kentucky, they do their best to say thank you. Mm-hmm. And provide cards or sentimental things, bringing their kids
our grandkids.
Our grandkids, to bring honor to our roles in the family and the things that we do. And
You know,
it's a big blessing.
It is. I love when we get the chance to see Chloe and Eliana,
Yeah.
that their moms taught them very diligently to come and say thank you.
Yes.
And they're just so sweet.
They are.
It's real heartwarming,
They are.
isn't it? So
And fun. They're fun.
let's consider Jordan for a moment. This is our son who is in his mid
He'll be
20s.
24.
Yeah,
in
be 20.
September. Mm-hmm.
Who's been on his own for a few years now, and he's graduated from college, and he's got a grown-up job, career. But he loves his mama,
He does.
and he while he definitely called me on Father's Day, which was again very tender thing for me. I'm very grateful for that. But he craves your counsel, doesn't he?
And I'm thankful for that.
You should be.
Yeah, I love getting calls from him when he's on his way home from work, or he's asking me, what should I wear to this, or
Or even more substantial things.
Yeah.
He's not at
Right.
all shy
the
about seeking
financial
counsel.
things,
Yeah,
or just and someday when a wife comes along, he may not do that anymore.
that's true. You might not.
So, which I would encourage him to go and seek her for counsel.
Yeah.
But it's always nice to know when your children need you that you're there.
Yeah, but you are touching on a point that we want to make sure we don't miss out on, and that is the reality of leaving and cleaving.
Yeah.
I know that in our world of homeschooling, there's often a sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle idea that the grand old man maintains authority and over his family even when the children are married.
Yeah.
And that's not right at all.
No.
In fact, what it is actually a violation of the fifth commandment,
That's right.
because wives are to submit to their
husband.
own husbands, not their mom's husband or their dad.
Yeah.
Right? So I worry about that.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that's not the same as when your kids are looking for a blessing or they're looking
Right.
for, but when they are emancipated, you're helping them launch.
Right.
You're not helping to keep them captive. And so much of this talk of when I hand them over in marriage, that's when I transfer my authority. Well, no, it isn't. When they're 18, the law says that. And the Bible does not tell us that we own our children to a certain age.
Right.
I think that there are a lot of patriarchal views that might, in the past, have been something that we supported probably more of, but recognize that it's not necessarily godly or healthy
Right.
for a family.
Right, but I agree. That said, I think we've always agreed that while we maybe didn't recognize that emancipation as early as we should have, we do recognize it. We recognize it at the very least at marriage,
Oh, absolutely.
and there are people who don't,
Yeah.
and that's not good.
Right.
Not good at all. Now, there are some subtleties to some of this. I remember when I was younger and sort of inclined toward a more anarchist perspective on things, distrusting all government in all situations, and having conversations with my father about various and sundry wars and what context is war okay, and he was just so zealous for Romans 13 and our command to obey the government that I would be like, okay, so the moment the Germans take over France, it's a sin to be in the French resistance? He said, no. And I said, okay, well, but they're the authority. And he said, and I wrestled over that because he's quoting the Bible. I don't want to be arguing with the Bible, but I think there is an uncertainty about when an authority becomes an authority, especially when that authority is overreaching. That said, I'm also zealous to be like my dad and honor my dad by saying to others who tend to be anarchists, hey, you don't want that. That's not what we're looking for. We need actual authority. So and I think that applies in parenting as well.
Well, I'm going to go back and visit something you just said.
Okay.
And you were saying that, did I hear you right saying that emancipation was when they got married, if they were still living in the home?
No, I didn't say that
Okay.
at all. I said
Yeah.
that might have been where we might have been.
Okay.
And I'm saying that might have been wrong.
Right.
But at the very least, we know that certainly after marriage it's happened.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I just want to make clear for our audience that we don't support, when a child is an adult legally, they are on their own. However, if they're living in our home, they have our rules still.
Yes,
There's
exactly.
kind of a compromise.
Yes.
You don't want to live by the rules, you don't have to live in our home. But we do want to make that very clear.
Yeah.
We do believe in guarding the hearts of our children. We do believe in raising children and training children. There's a lot of kids out there who aren't trained, who act like craziness, and their parents get really aggravated with them because they aren't trained. They just have an expectation of a behavior that they didn't train in the child.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when they get the bad behavior, they are more
Yeah,
angry
they
with the
freak
child,
out.
and the child pays for that. So,
Well, and I think
but
that's
thank God. Well, and let me just say this in
Go
latter
right ahead.
years. My brother and I, we grew up in a home that was pretty volatile when we were growing up. We had, of course, my dad died when I was 4. My mom remarried when I was 6, and he was an alcoholic. Well, I don't know if I want to say that. He was a mean drunk.
Okay.
He wasn't always drinking and groping, but when he did, he was mean, and he hit, and he punched, and he was sexually abusive. And my mom, I remember just watching her be pregnant with my brother, and my dad just hauling off and hitting her and knocking her on the floor, and me running for help. And back in that time, people just kind of wanted to mind their own business.
Right.
And as my brother and I grew up, and our goal when we received the Lord was to honor our parents.
Right.
No matter what they did. We don't excuse the behavior, but we would still try to lead them to the Lord, because, how uncanny to think that children are going to tell an adult how to grow up.
Right.
How not to behave, how we don't hit big people.
Right.
When you're saying, don't punch your brother or sister.
Right.
Well, don't punch my mom.
Right.
And, the beauty of that is the love of the Holy Spirit operating in us with forgiveness and tenderness, and not denying the things that happen, but thanking God that we fulfilled our role as children,
Yes.
honoring them.
Yes, precisely.
And, however that looked.
Well, and it can be really hard, and that's often what we do, how the devil sort of tempts us is, me submit to that? Again, that's what pushed me towards that anarchy with respect to the government, is I didn't respect them. They were evil,
Right.
and they still are.
Right.
But that doesn't change what God commands of me.
Right.
And I think it's one of the blessings of the clarity of the Ten Commandments, and that we really see it here. There's no excuse. This doesn't mean you don't report crimes of those in authority over you or anything like that, but it does mean you don't see yourself as a lone ranger.
Right.
You see yourself under authority, recognizing that those over you are sinners, and when you are given authority, you recognize the reality of your own sin.
That's right.
Well, sweetheart, we're going to come back next time, and we're going to look at the 6th commandment, and God willing, we'll be able to have you right here week after week after week. But for now, let me just say goodbye, welcome back, and your husband loves you.
I love you too.
It's not a common thing for the country of Uganda to be making the national news, and yet over the last several weeks it has been, in the national news here in the United States. What's interesting is that what's brought it to the attention of the American public, this African country, is that they have recently passed a law that has been described by the mainstream media as a law, what's the word for it? An anti-gay legislation with death penalty in some cases is the headline from ABC News. Well, what is kept from those who don't read beyond the headlines is a couple of important bits of information. But before I get to those, let's just remember the reason it's in the news is because this is shocking to American sensibilities. This is a man bites dog story. I don't know if you know that imagery there, but reporters are told that a story about a dog biting a man is not much of a story. That's not that surprising. But if a man bit a dog, that would be a story. So this is a story because it's shocking to the American mindset. But as I said, there's a lot behind it that makes this less than shocking. First of all is this: Uganda already had a law in place outlawing the practice of homosexuality. This is not something wildly new. It was determined that according to its law already that what was the language they used? And it goes back to when it was under the rule of England that the practice, any unnatural sex act was considered a criminal offense there. All that has changed really here is that what's been added to it is this death penalty for what is called aggravated homosexuality. This is defined as sexual relations involving people infected with HIV, as well as with minors and other categories of vulnerable people. Now, one would have us believe, based on these headlines, if we don't read below them, that Uganda has equipped a group of jackbooted thugs to peer in the windows of all sorts of folks to bring them under arrest. It's not the case at all. It never has been the case. It is the case, however, that they are trying to write a law to outlaw the practice of homosexual behavior. Well, we can debate about whether or not that's good policy, but when we do so, we should do so remembering that this was the policy of not just African nations, but the whole world, and to this day still the case in Muslim nations. It's the case around the world up until very recently. You know, I'm not beyond believing that our ancestors had some things wrong, significantly wrong, morally speaking. There are things that my forefathers believed that I'm ashamed of. There's no question about it. But the idea that we should just be flabbergasted over people affirming things that people affirmed as a normal course of life 50 years ago is a little bit, I don't know, shocking to me. We even had Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who in years past has been a actual genuine contender for the Republican nomination for the presidency, who's got a reputation as a strong and faithful conservative, came out speaking publicly against this law. Now, again, not in a nuanced, careful, hey, you know, this is probably not the best thing. This is probably not the best way to fight this. There is a 1 Corinthians 5 case that could be made that says, no, it's not a function of the state to keep consenting adults from practicing perversion. But nevertheless, to argue that on its face, anything that outlaws homosexuality or even makes it any level or kind or subdivision of homosexual behavior, not only a criminal offense but a capital offense, is to run into God's law. I'm not arguing that Uganda or these United States are or should be Old Testament Israel. I am arguing that Old Testament Israel is the nation that God established, and its law was given by God, and that its law outlawed homosexual behavior, and it was a capital offense. Does that offend you? Does that upset you? Again, I'm not making an argument about what should be now, what God's will is for this nation now. I am saying that God is who He is, and that we are guilty of making up our own stuff. I'm really not surprised. It's not the right word. I'm put off by what President Joe Biden said. He called the new law a tragic violation of universal human rights. Where did those universal human rights come from? The same guy who passed a similar law when he created his own nation in Israel? Friends, be careful. Be careful not to try to fall for the triangulation where we have to appear to oppose this so that we don't look like complete nuts. But let's and find ourselves in a place where we're actually disagreeing with the law of God. Don't be embarrassed by what God's word says. Don't be embarrassed by those who are trying to be in submission to it, even if they make a mistake, or at least trying. Well, I want to be sure to affirm again the reality that God comes into the garden in a posture of grace. I also want to acknowledge that it's a perfectly rational and understandable thing that Adam and Eve would be fearful. God had been quite clear. The day you eat of the fruit, you will die. So they're not just hearing as the footsteps of God in the garden are heard. They're not just hearing the arrival of the creator that they've wronged. They're hearing the arrival of the executioner. It's a scary thing indeed. Again, very real. Two real people. And the truth is, their death did begin with that sin. The death began with their coming to recognize their sinfulness. Their bodies did begin to decay. It is a process. It's wise for us all to remember that we're all terminal from the moment of our beginning. But as we considered last time in our month of Sunday devotional, we remember that God came and speaking judgment speaks grace to Adam and Eve. But there's even a way that God speaks grace to Adam and Eve in the curses that he gives to them. Chapter 3 of Genesis, verse 16 begins, "To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Then to Adam he said, Because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Where's the good news? Where's the grace in these curses? These are foundational curses. These are not, oh, by the way, you might have some bad weather from time to time, or you might get a Charlie horse if you're not careful to stretch before you go out and do your work. Now, these are essential curses, curses on what defines us, and in fact, curses on what Adam and Eve were called to do. Remember, the central command, the only real command they've been given, is to be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and everything that creeps upon the ground. And now they're being told, and boy howdy, is it going to be difficult. It's going to be really, really hard. Well, where's the grace? Well, the grace is they still have a job. They still have a calling. They still have a responsibility. To put it another way, they still have another reason for being. Their purpose is not gone. They have not entered into that world that Solomon would describe in the book of Ecclesiastes, where everything is futility, chasing after the wind. Yes, their job is going to be difficult. It's going to happen by the sweat of their brow. It's going to happen with pain and with sorrow and with physical death. But the job is there. They have the responsibility and the calling and the blessing. Remember this. when God comes and pronounces his curse on the work of Adam and Eve, he is not delivering work as a curse. The work is a blessing. The hardship, the thorns and the thistles, the pain and the childbearing, these things are hardships. They're genuine hardships. I don't want to dispute that at all. I'm sitting right here right now, sore all over from the hard work I had to do to put our garden in. It's a whopper of a garden, and we're praying over it that God should bless it. But there's still going to have to be weeds to be pulled, thorns and thistles, and all sorts of sweaty labor. And the truth is, after I'm done here, I may go out there and have to, what's the word for it? I'm not harvesting it. Well, the truth is, I have to go out and cut the grass, which is not my favorite thing in the world to do. But it is part of the exercise of dominion. We still have this call. The fall has not undone our responsibility. By the way, you see the same dominion mandate being spoken again when Noah and his family steps off the ark. It doesn't change. The covenant that God made with mankind in Adam and Eve abides. But now there's a penalty. Now there's punishment. Now it's going to be harder. That's why when I give my outline of the Bible, Genesis 1 and 2, creation. Roman numeral 2, Genesis 3, fall. Roman numeral 3, Genesis 4. Through Revelation 22. Trying to get back to Genesis 1 and 2, only better. The glory of the second Adam is not only that he fulfilled what the second Adam failed to fulfill, but he fulfilled it in the context of Adam's failure. He, in 1 Corinthians 15, delivers the kingdom back up to the Father. He's completed the task. And he's done it against all odds. Because he is the one worthy of all praise and all honor, and it's all right here. Half of chapter 11 in Genesis deals with the story of the Tower of Babel, which we have covered in a couple of in the beginning segments. But the second half is one of those places in the scripture where we get a long line of genealogies, beginning with the genealogy of Shem's descendants. Shem, you will remember, was one of the three sons of Noah. He was the one who received the greatest blessing, and he is the one from whom, as we're going to discover, Abraham came. Shem is the father of the Shemites, or the Semites. One of the things you'll notice about this genealogy is that there's not any stopping along the way to tell any amazing stories, like the genealogy that includes Enoch, which we're told in Enoch walked with the Lord and was no more, where he does not ever die, or any of the, this is the group that did this kind of work, and this is the group that did that kind of work. It's pretty much just ages when they gave birth to their first son, and then ages when they died. But there is something to be noticed here with the ages when they died, and that is we have this radical shift. Though I should say it happens over generations, but this radical shift away from normal lives lasting multiple hundreds of years, as we know in the case of Methuselah, over 900 years, down to lives that are eventually under 200 and the lower 100 years. And there's been a lot of speculation on that, a lot of even hay being made by unbelievers who say, well, look, you can't trust the Bible. It says these people live to be this long and that long, and we know people don't live to be that long. Well, it's true that people don't live typically, many, beyond 120 years. I don't know what the current record is in the modern world, somewhere under 130, I'm quite confident. So how could this be? Well, there's a couple of different theories to that, and I'd like to share them with you. One is connected to what's called the canopy theory, this idea that before the flood of Noah, rain was a not existing thing, that the process by which God watered his creation was more like the descending of dew daily, that above the whole earth there was this great canopy of misty waters that would fall down all at once and then rise up in the night, and then everything would be watered, and that this canopy would have blocked out so many of the destructive rays that come with sunshine. Then comes the flood, the canopy is no longer there, and now we break down so much more quickly. The theory that I prefer, I'm not against the canopy theory, but the theory that I prefer is a little bit more simple and a little bit more congruent with things that we believe that we know now. And that's simply this, that we've got to remember that Adam and Eve were made perfect. They were perfect before the fall, and their bodies, therefore, were perfect before the fall. And what we see over the passage of time, whether you want to call it the application of entropy or something of that nature, we see human bodies, again, breaking down. This would explain also the movement of the law, and this applies to Abram, of course, the movement of God's law in terms of the laws of consanguinity. That is, we know, for instance, Adam and Eve's children had to marry each other. We know that Abram and Sarah were half-brother and sister. We know that later on, that would have been outlawed in God's law. And that's because these genetic mutations that happen, in part because of the fall, can sort of proliferate and match up and cause a great deal of hardship. So what we're seeing, and it's interesting, is it not, that it is not really explained. So yes, these are theories, but the fact that it's not explained, I think, is profoundly interesting. That it's just an expected natural shift in a post-fall world. Now, I personally am profoundly interested in the study of OOPArts, out-of-place artifacts. That is, things that have a technology well beyond the technology that we know a given time period had, and yet we find these artifacts connected to that time period. I'm connected to that. I wonder, is there anything left from before the flood? And what kind of technological advances did they have? And how much could they learn over all these hundreds of years? Well, those are things we'll learn when we enter into the gates of heaven. And so we'll probably have to wait till then. For now, it's just simple theories. And that's all I've given you. I'm not giving you, thus saith the Lord, just a couple of theories to help us understand as we watch the ages decline through this list of Shem's descendants. In order to help us not live our lives in an echo chamber, it's probably a good thing every now and again to ask ourselves this simple question. What are we most worried about when we're considering our ideological friends? Well, as I think about that, I realize that we are really quite overrun by the cowardice of those that I call paper prophets. These are thundering heroes who build a following and a reputation by denouncing with great vigor and panache the errors of those who are not their audience. They preach against Nineveh in Jerusalem, pronouncing woe against Jerusalem in Cleveland. When we do this, we get credit, an unearned reputation for courage, when the truth is all we're really doing is tickling ears. Now, I have friends, plenty of them, at varying distances from my own ideological sweet spot, and I have plenty of concerns over them. Usually they're distance from my ideological sweet spot. But what really concerns me is the weakness evident among those who are just like me, those who believe what I believe. Of course, all sin, sooner or later, traces its origins back to the father of sins, the devil, and the mother of sin in him, pride. Check the tag on any given sin, and it is apt to declare, brought to you by pride. Pride, however, has numerous nuances. We're not safe if we avoid their kind of pride while embracing our own kind of pride. We're sinful enough, in fact, that we can even be proud of our humility, parading it around so that others will think well of us. We boast that we're the ones good enough to believe in total depravity. We can take our shame and turn it into pride, turning our scarlet A into an adornment. We, that is, people like me, all along the way, we reject the worldliness of a gaudy pride while nurturing the worldliness of a smug pride. We look down our noses at the world. We look down our noses at our brothers and sisters in other wings of the evangelical church. We look down our noses at the respectable people in our own wing of the evangelical church, all for looking down their noses at us. We are, if you will, smuggle, alone in our dark cave, caressing our precious ring of orthodoxy and orthopraxy. It is that smugness that worries me. That quiet, unassuming assumption that I'm not only better than other men, but disdainful of them, beyond them, in possession of the one truth to unite them all. The solution, of course, is not to deny the power of the truth we have learned. Insofar as our convictions flow out of the Bible, they are indeed eternally precious. Instead, the solution, as is so often the case, is gratitude and humility. God did not reveal his truth to us so that we could stroke it in some dark cave. He gave it to us that we might let his light shine before men, and that we might give thanks to the praise of his glory. Whether one, like the world, is proud of one's sin, or if one, like me, is proud of one's right thinking and right doing, either way, one is still caught in the web of pride. What we must cast into the fires is not the righteousness, but the pride. What we must do is repent and believe the gospel, giving thanks. People like me need to learn this wisdom from the prophet, that blessed are the poor in spirit, for ours is his kingdom. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsprouljr.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.